Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So today I'm finally doing a part 2 to a video I filmed like 3 years ago, but I've been meaning to do a part 2 for this for a while, but I wanted to make sure that I had read enough books and had enough of an opinion on said books to make this video. So as you can tell by the title, this is 5 more overhyped novels that I do not think are worth it. Now, if these books are books that you love, that's awesome, and a lot of people out there absolutely adore the books I'm about to talk about, but they didn't work for me. So please do not be offended that I didn't love these books, but they were books that I read because of how hyped up people made them and how much people said they loved them, and I just didn't connect with them the way that those people did. And I hate to do this because I think this author is actually going to have my favorite book of the year so far, so I don't feel as bad doing it, but we're gonna hate on Josh Malerman for a little bit because Bird Box is his most famous novel, and it was turned into the film of the same name that's like huge on Netflix, and I read this and I just did not get it. And I remember reading this and then watching the movie thinking like, oh, like maybe the movie's like better than the book, which is a rare thing, but it does happen. And I thought the movie was like 10 times worse than the book, so I couldn't believe that this book was so popular. And it actually, unfortunately, put me off from reading Josh Malerman for a while. And a year or two later, I ended up picking up Goblin, which I did enjoy, which then convinced me to read Daphne, which then convinced me to read Incidents Around the House. And those are all books I really, really like. And I'm just like, this is like the dud in his bibliography, and I don't understand how it's so popular. And I even got like a copy of Mallory in Nightworms when I first subscribed. And I'm never going to read that book because I have a whole video that I've put up recently on why I don't like series, and I am not falling for that. I am not reading more with these characters because I didn't like it. If you have not heard of Bird Box, I'm going to read the back of this book. Something terrifying that must not be seen. One glimpse and a person is driven to deadly violence. No one knows what it is or where it came from. 5 years after it began, a handful of scattered survivors remain, including Mallory and her 2 young children. Living in an abandoned house near the river, Mallory has long dreamed of fleeing to a place where her family might be safe. But the journey ahead will be terrifying, 20 miles downriver in a rowboat blindfolded. One wrong choice, and they will die. And something is following them. But is it man, animal, or monster? Engulfed in darkness, surrounded by sounds both familiar and frightening, Mallory embarks on a harrowing odyssey. A trip that takes her into an unseen world and back into the past, the companions who once saved her. Interweaving past and present, Josh Malerman's breathtaking debut is a horrific, gripping snapshot of a world unraveled that will have you racing to the final page. Now, I have to give him credit. This is his debut novel, and all of his books that I've read since are much stronger. And I did just say this, too, about Riley Sager and his debut novel, Final Girls. So I do understand why, looking back, I'm like, I love a lot of his stuff now, but I didn't like this. Another thing I will say is I think the twist in this book was pretty interesting. I really liked the kind of flash forward and flash back layout of this book, figuring out how everything lined up where it is. My biggest issue with this novel, though, was I just didn't like Mallory. I didn't like Mallory. I didn't like how she acted around other people. I didn't like how she acted around her children. I really actually didn't like how she acted around her children. And I found her very, very, very hard to connect with. Now, there are some moments in this book that I think are very, very scary. But there's also some moments in this book that I think are absolutely ridiculous. And so, yeah, I don't want to say that this was a bad book because I didn't like it, but I didn't like it, and I just don't think that it deserves all of the praise that it has been getting when Josh Malerman has written much stronger, much more emotionally advanced and more intelligent, well-written novels since then. So, fine for a debut. I'm not a big fan of some of Stephen King's earlier stuff, too. Like, I am not a fan of Carrie, the book. I think as, like, where it is overall as a story in pop culture, I appreciate it, but, like, I'm not a big fan of some of the stuff Stephen King wrote, and I know Terry is technically his debut novel, but he wrote a bunch of other books beforehand. But yeah, sometimes your debut novel is just you getting your footing, and it doesn't always work for people. It doesn't always work for people, but hey, it got their foot through the door, and then they go on to write amazing, amazing, amazing things. Check out Incidents Around the House by Josh Malerman. It's fantastic. I love it. And we wouldn't have it without Bird Box. Okay, next up, I actually don't have this book with me anymore. I sold it, so I'm going to put it up next to me. But T. Kingfisher disappointed me. I love T. Kingfisher normally. And I think the Hollow Places is absolutely fantastic. I think A House with Good Bones is absolutely fantastic. The Twisted Ones was interesting and weird, but I was on board with it. But What Moves the Dead is probably her most popular novel. It is also the start of a series. Don't think it was meant or like originally supposed to be, but I was so invested in reading this novel, and then I read it, and I was so let down. So let down. I'm going to read the back of the book, or like the premise or whatnot, but this is her interpretation of Edgar Allan Poe's Fall of the House of Usher. She does a lot of reimaginings. That's kind of her thing. T. Kingfisher is actually a pen name, but that's what she writes when she's doing like horror. So I've only read her horror stuff. I can't speak on anything else that she's written, but just beware of that. I'm going to read the premise. From the award-winning author of The Twisted Ones comes a gripping and atmospheric retelling of Edgar Allan Poe's classic, The Fall of the House of Usher. When Alex Easton, a retired soldier, receives word that their childhood friend Madeline Usher is dying, they race to the ancestral home of the Ushers in the remote countryside of Ruravia. I don't know. It's a made-up country. What they find there is a nightmare of fungal growths and possessed wildlife surrounding a dark, pulsing lake. Madeline sleepwalks and speaks in strange voices at night, and her brother Roderick is consumed by a mysterious malady of the nerves. Aided by a redoubtable British mycologist and a baffled American doctor, Alex must unravel the mystery. Alex must unravel the secret of the House of Usher before it consumes them all. Okay, got a couple problems with this novel. 1. Spore. Mushroom horror. Not a fan. Super, super, super intricate mushroom horror. Hated that. 2. One of the things that I love so much about T. Kingfisher's reimagining of Gothic lit short stories, which is what she did with The Twisted Ones and The Hollow Places, is how she likes to set them in modern day and give them a modern feel. She did not do that with What Moves the Dead. Instead, she just kind of moved what country they were in, and then created this whole fictional background to explain why a non-binary character existed in the 1800s. And it just added so much to a story that if she had just set in present day, wouldn't have needed that much background. That was literally just there to kind of explain why this character could exist in that time period. And I found it so confusing because in doing so, she really, really, like, I think bit off more than she could chew. She created her own, like, language, her own, like, use of pronouns, like, pronouns that meant completely different things. There was like 19 pronouns in this book, all meaning various different things, and it was so confusing. And the book wasn't long enough to warrant that much world building and background. And I felt like had it just been set in modern times and been a modern retelling, I would have been way more receptive because it wouldn't have needed so much background that just wasn't pivotal to the story. It also did nothing to change the actual story of the fall of the House of Usher in a unique way. It was very true and just kind of added extra things to the original story. Whereas her other stories, by being set in different times and places, really, I think, elevate those tales into something that can, you know, be a full-length novel versus, like, I don't know, like, 40-page short story. And so I really didn't like that. And when I look at what Mike Flanagan just did with the Fall of the House of Usher, it's just like I wanted this book to be that, and it just fell so short, and it had so many missed opportunities to be amazing, and just wasn't, unfortunately. Okay, next up. I just read this book, and so many people told me that I was going to love this book. And this is episode 13 by Craig DeLuey. Now, I do still need to read more from Craig DeLuey, and I don't by any means dislike this book, but I did not love this book, and I was very much convinced that I was going to love this book based on the premise and how much people talk about it. I'm going to read the back of the book. Fade to Black is the newest hit ghost hunting reality TV show, led by husband and wife team Matt and Claire Kirkland. It features a dedicated crew of ghost hunting experts. Episode 13 takes them to every ghost hunter's holy grail, the Paranormal Research Foundation. This crumbling derelict mansion holds secrets and clues about bizarre experiments that took place there in the 1970s. It's also undoubtedly haunted, and Matt hopes to use scientific techniques and high-tech gear to prove it. But as the house begins to slowly reveal itself to the crew, proof of an afterlife might not be everything Matt dreamed of. I was so on board with this story for the first, 2/3, found footage style writing, like a lot of epistles and like diary entries and just like, again, found footage, like written in text and whatnot, about a haunted house that's actually haunted, and like the film crew that's there filming like ghost hunters, basically. I loved this concept. I was so on board for it until it decided to go all House of Leaves and become this like crazy interdimensional House of Leaves knockoff, which was a lot. It was not at all what I was expecting, and kind of took away from like the fun campiness of just being like a found footage story. In the more like traditional sense, it gets very over the top. But the other thing too that I really didn't like about this book is the book focuses pretty heavily on a character named Claire, who I really just thought was absolutely awful, like just absolutely horrific. And the more we spent time with her and the more I realized that she wasn't going to have any kind of growth or change and develop as a person and become like likable, the more I just started rolling my eyes trying to finish this book, because a lot of awful things happen to a lot of characters. And then we just really kind of focused on Claire as our lead when I don't think that it was fitting. And it's never fun to like follow a character you just don't like for the vast majority of a novel, especially as it's approaching its climax, and like all of its big reveals. And so I just didn't love that. I really loved the first half. I thought the first half was really well done. It was really interesting, and I was really engaging with the different characters and trying to figure them out. And I loved the whole just like setting up ghost detecting stuff in a rickety old house. And trying to crack the mystery of people who disappeared there, also ghost hunting previously. And I wish it had just really stayed in that realm and didn't try and go above and beyond into something far more cosmic. Because then it really kind of almost borderlined on sci-fi at the end, and it just wasn't what I needed it to be. And I felt as it was expanding, it really started to expand who the characters were and made them far more, I don't want to say complex, but far more intricate than they were previously, and taking away the simplicity of who these characters were and giving them these kind of crazy backgrounds. It didn't work for me. It was just adding too much at the end, and all of this was packed into that final third. And I'm still not even 100% sure what happened at the end, but I also just don't care. So yeah, wanted to love that one. I understand why a lot of people like it. It is very House of Leaves-y, but it's like House of Leaves diet. Like, it just didn't quite have everything I wanted in it. So sorry, Craig DeLuey. I will definitely read more from him though. I do enjoy his writing style. Okay, next up. I also no longer have this book, but I'm going to talk about it because I feel like it is one of the most popular horror novels recently, and that is The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. I heard so much about this book. It has a 4.47 on Goodreads, and I wanted so badly to love it. I definitely know I need to give Tananarive Due another chance. A lot of people told me to read more of her earlier work, so I will be doing that. But let's read the back, and then I will tell you why this book didn't work for me. A gripping page-turning novel set in Jim Crow, Florida, that follows Robert Stevens Jr. as he's sent to a segregated reform school that is a chamber of terrors where he sees the horror of racism and injustice for the living and the dead. Gracetown, Florida, June 1950. 12-year-old Robbie Stevens Jr. is sentenced to 6 months at the Gracetown School for Boys, a reformatory, for kicking the son of the largest landowner in town in defense of his older sister, Gloria. So begins Robbie's journey further into the terrors of the Jim Crow South and the very real horror of the school they call the Reformatory. Robbie has a talent for seeing ghosts, or haints. But what was once a comfort to him after the loss of his mother has become a window to the truth of what happened to the Reformatory. Boys forced to work to remediate their so-called crimes have gone missing, but the haints Robbie sees hint at worse things. Through his friends Redbone and Blue, Robbie is learning not just the rules, but how to survive. Meanwhile, Gloria is rallying every family member in connection in Florida to find a way to get Robbie out before it's too late. The Reformatory is a haunting work of historical fiction written as only American Book Award-winning author Tananarive Due could, by piecing together the life of the relative her family never spoke of, and bringing his tragedy and those of so many others to the infamous Dozier School for Boys to the light in this riveting novel. Okay, that was a lot. And there's a lot going on in this book as well. My biggest issue with The Reformatory is I felt like it needed to be split into 2 different stories. A story focusing on Robbie and his time at the Reformatory, and a story of Gloria coming to the realizations of growing up and losing her innocence as a child and heading into adulthood during the time of the Jim Crow South, and seeing how unfair it is. They felt like two very, 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 very different stories kind of glued together as one. So it was very disjointed, and I really didn't like a lot of the Gloria chapters because I just did not like her as a character. She never learned from her mistakes. She made a lot of mistakes. She was very arrogant, and she did a lot of dumb things that got a lot of people into more trouble than they should have, and I just found her difficult to deal with. Robbie, however, I had issues with because it was paralleling the true horrors of Jim Crow South with this kind of ghost story. And again, that itself also to me felt very, very disjointed. I feel like this story could have worked just as historical fiction. Still could have been horror because of the horrors that happen. Or it needed to lean more into being a ghost story and just kind of create a little bit more atmosphere and lore with the ghost. I had a really hard time connecting with some of the ghosts that Robbie interacts with too, and I don't want to spoil this, but I just don't understand where his loyalty came from when those ghosts don't necessarily seem to be they don't seem to have the best intentions for Robbie and Robbie's friends. And so I just didn't quite understand the loyalty and some of the decisions that he made. So it also made him kind of a difficult character for me to believe, even though I did tend to like him as a character. He also pees a lot. I've never read a book that has a character peeing in fear that much. Once, maybe 2 times in a book, that's fine. But that was kind of like this kid's like go-to reaction. Like, you know, like when a squid squirts ink, that's kind of what this kid did. And it was very, very strange. So there was that for me as well. So it just felt very, very disjointed. But I did enjoy her writing style. I would love to read more from Du. I just don't think this story worked for me just because there was such a large disconnect between the two stories, as well as the horrors of reality and the horrors of the supernatural. They just didn't mesh well to me. Sometimes I think books can do it really, really, really phenomenally, and sometimes it just doesn't quite work as a parallel metaphor, and I felt in this one it just didn't quite work for me. So I was really let down by that, and I wanted to love that book so much because people talk about it so highly, and I just didn't. Okay, and last but not least, we have Boys in the Valley by Philip Fracassi. The reason I'm holding this book right now is because this was released originally in a very, very small batch, and it was so well received that they decided to give it a wide publication release. And that was awesome. I had been hearing about this for like years. I was so pumped to read this. I had read A Child Alone with Strangers previously, and I loved that book. And then I read Gothic, and I was like a little like turned off by the ending of that book and some of like the tones that Philip Fracassi had, but it was still written in a style where I was like, I love this author's voice, so I want to read more. So, lo and behold, I got The Boys in the Valley. And I was devastated by how much I did not work with this book. Let's read the inside flap. St. Vincent's Orphanage for Boys. Early 20th century in a remote valley in Pennsylvania. Here, under the watchful eyes of several priests, 32 boys work, learn, and worship. Peter Barlow, orphaned as a child by a gruesome murder, has made a new life here. As he approaches adulthood, he has friends, a future, a family. Then, late one stormy night, a group of men arrive at their door, one of whom is badly wounded, occult symbols carved into its flesh. His death releases an ancient evil that spreads like sickness, infecting St. Vincent's and the children within. Soon, boys begin acting differently, forming groups, taking sides. Others turn up dead. Now Peter and those dear to him must choose sides of their own, each of them knowing their lives and perhaps their eternal souls are at risk. It sounds amazing. It sounds amazing. It sounds amazing. This was pitched to me very much as like a Lord of the Flies style book meets like The Exorcist, I think is what they wanted to say. This book could have worked if I think Philip Fracassi knew what message he was trying to send. And I think that was my issue with this book, is it just got very clouded in what was being said, and I truly, truly hated the ending of this story, because this book really did feel kind of like a criticism on religious hypocrisy. and then kind of dialed that message back to be something else. And I feel like, too, like, where Lord of the Flies works really, really well is as you watch people succumb to evil of their own making. This one, you have a lot of characters where their evil is based upon possession. And so it doesn't have the kind of visceral reaction that you get with, like, the piggy scene in Lord of the Flies, which is so famous and so iconic. If you don't know what I'm talking about and you haven't read or seen Lord of the Flies, I highly recommend it. It's very disturbing. And so this just felt very, very flat to me in what I felt like it was being set up to do. Yeah, I don't know. I really wanted to love it. And it's in, like, this really cool, like, almost this really cool, isolated, like, Gothic style building in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, during, like, a snowstorm. Like, I felt like they had so much opportunities to do really, really amazing and cool things with it, and everything just kept missing the mark. Again, in favor of this, like, good versus evil, God-loving servant versus, like, possessed demonic creature. And it just kind of became this, like, war of good and evil with a lot of weird, jumbled religious commentary throughout the novel that, to me, never actually said what it was trying to say and never actually went where it was, because Philip Fracassi was writing so many different angles and so many different forces in this narrative that I never knew what he was trying to say. And it just felt very, very much of a letdown, especially when you've read novels like Gothic and A Child Alone with Strangers, where the messages that he's trying to send are very, very, very clear, especially in something as, like, dismal and depressing as Gothic. This kind of having this, like, almost like Messiah savior character, martyr style character at the heart of this novel just made me wonder, like, what Fracassi's opinions are on this kind of subject matter to begin with, because it's so blatantly different than the kind of doom and gloom that you get in Gothic. So, I don't know. I wanted to love this book. I just found it very, very jumbled and very hard to navigate based on the messages that Philip Fracassi was trying to send. And I just kept thinking, oh, it would have been so much better if it was written like this, or if this happened instead. And you never want to read a book and think that you can come up with something that would have worked better. That sucks. Especially for somebody like Philip Fracassi, who I do really enjoy as a writer, usually. Anyways, those are my 5 books that I feel are overhyped. Again, if you love these books, that's awesome. I'm so glad they worked for you. I really wanted these books to work for me. That's why I picked them up. And they just let me down. Oh well. Anyways, that is all that I have for you guys today. As always, I try to post every Monday and Thursday, sometimes on Saturdays. And if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, and I will catch you on the next one. Mwah.